Good morning. I'll call this meeting to order. It's the regularly scheduled meeting of the Transportation and Public Works Committee this day, May 3rd, 2016. I'm Councilman Reich. I'll be chairing, and I'm joined by my colleagues, Council Members Yang, Glidden, Palmisano, Bender, and Gordon. And we're a full complement of the committee and can proceed with today's agenda. On today's agenda, we have 14 items, including public hearings and discussion items, but I'll first go through the consent items. Any committee member can pull them for further consideration. Item 3 is automatic vehicle management policy, and it's adopting the management of the city's fleet vehicles using automatic vehicle management systems, AVM, which uses global positioning devices and software to collect key vehicle diagnostics and location information. Item 4 is the water service line repair assessment reduction, as listed for the address on the agenda. Item 5 is the agreement with the Minnesota Department of Transportation for transfer of soil stockpile for the 10th Avenue Southeast Bridge area. And then item 6 is a supplemental agreement with the ABC Parking Ramp Management Agreement with the state of Minnesota, and that's authorizing supplemental agreement number 2 to the original parking ramp agreement to facilitate the request for the Minnesota Twins to use top-level ramp B for staging fireworks displays at the target field. Item 7 is the contract amendment with Control Incorporated for dewatering plant software changes. That'll be referred to Ways and Means. Item 8 is the contract amendment with KL America Incorporated for on-street parking system. That also will be referred to Ways and Means. Item 9 is the contract amendment with Conurbation LLC for the Nicollet Mall management. That item will be referred to Ways and Means. Item 10 is the 18th Avenue Northeast Reconstruction Project variance request, and that's a variance request needed for some depth issues for that project. Item 11 is Lake Street Reconstruction, Blaisdell Avenue South to 5th Avenue South layout approval and variance request. Item 12 is the traffic zones, restrictions and controls first quarter report. And item 13 is the bid for 26th Avenue Reconstruction Project, and that's an acceptance of a low bid as listed, and that will be referred to Ways and Means. Committee members, do you wish to pull any item? Councilor Yang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to make a comment on item number 13. I don't want to pull it off. Just wanted to make some comments, if that's okay.
Please do.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is an item for a bid for 26th Avenue Reconstruction Project, and this is something that is happening in Ward 5. And outside of the low bid, one of the things that came out of this was that we as a city are definitive about how this project that was supposed to be a 2-year project is extending out to be a 3-year project. And I have to tell you that it is very difficult for me to be excited about just this project being extended another extra year, just because the folks who live around 26th Avenue North have had to endure quite a bit of hardship because of this long construction period. And most of these construction periods they start prior to even us as the city starting it, just because the utility companies come in beforehand. The streets are closed, and then on top of that, we go out to the public and basically promise them that we're going to finish this in 2 years, or we at least represent that. And folks like myself or my colleagues, we sit in on these meetings in which we tell people that. And sometimes people are just very unhappy about being assessed. Sometimes they're unhappy just about anything and everything related to the project. And then for us to at this point come to this conclusion that we're going to take an extra year, it just makes it very difficult for me to feel good about this. I know that nothing I say will change the fact that this project is going to get extended, but I have to just say I'm just very disappointed that this project has extended out this long. I wish we would have worked really in a way in which our work matched what our words were to the public or to my constituents in Ward 5. And so that's kind of just my 2 cents on just this. Is very disappointed that this is going to be extended out another year. And anytime we extend this project out another year, it means that the project can be done in about 2017, but it's going to take another extra year for landscaping and those sorts of things. And it's just those sorts of hardships that make it really difficult for 26th Avenue North, which is a project that probably, in my view, should have happened maybe 10 or so years ago. And so it's just disappointing. So I just wanted to throw that out there, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for those comments, and there's no doubt reconstruction projects are by their very nature very disruptive, and I imagine the extension to that project exacerbates that fact. Any further conversation on the consent items? Seeing none, I will move all items as stated. All in approval say aye. Aye. Dissenting nay. Those items carry, and we can now go to our public hearing. Item 1 is our first public hearing, and that's regarding the I-35W Transit Access Project Municipal Consent. Good morning, Mr. Kaki.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Jenny Hager, our Director of Transportation Planning and Programming, will start this out, and then we have Mr. Jim Grube from the county that will also make a portion of the presentation today.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, committee members. Jenny Hager, Director of Transportation Planning and Programming for Public Works. I'm joined here today by some of my colleagues on the project team that I'll just note. Jim Grube with Hennepin County, John Griffith with MnDOT, and a full contingent from Metro Transit. We have Charles Carlson, Christina Morrison, Max, and I'm sorry I don't know the last and final person, but we do have a full contingent of the project team here today with us. It is with a great sense of accomplishment that we are here today to present to you the final layout for municipal consent for the series of projects located along the 35W corridor between the 94 Commons and 42nd Street, more commonly known individually as the Chapter 152 Bridges, Transit Access, and Rehabilitation Projects. This is a culmination of several years of work by an interagency team with folks represented here today, led by Hennepin County, with the City of Minneapolis, the Minnesota Department of Transportation, and Metro Transit. Just going back in time a little bit to talk a little bit about the project timeline. This project dates back to the late 90s when it was known as the Lake Street Access Project. The primary goal at that point in time was to add access to Lake Street because the freeway had been constructed without that access. That was a disservice to the surrounding neighborhoods and an economic disadvantage to the businesses along Lake Street. In 2004, a concept was approved by both Hennepin County and the City of Minneapolis. However, that project went on hiatus. During that time, Hennepin County shifted their focus to reconstructing Lake Street. The idea of bus rapid transit was introduced for the 35W corridor, and the Urban Partnership Agreement, or UPA project, was implemented, and it made a significant contribution to advancing transit in this corridor. In 2007, the City Council passed a resolution calling essentially for a reboot of the Access project. The partner agencies conducted a feasibility study to develop a fiscally responsible plan that resulted in the launching of the Transit Access project. Project development has been underway since 2010, and we're currently planning for construction to begin in late 2017. The reboot, why and what it was. The why results from the Lake Street Access project. It was estimated to exceed $500 million in cost, and it only planned for future transit in the corridor. It did not immediately advance transit. So what was the reboot? It was the city's call for the development of a fiscally responsible plan that would include a high-quality, inside lane, multimodal bus rapid transit stations, a lot of adjectives, at Lake Street, along with a high-quality bicycle and pedestrian connection to the Midtown Greenway as the highest and top priority. It would also include new access to Lake Street, and in 2012, the City Council passed a resolution agreeing that the new access would be in the form of a southbound exit to Lake Street and a northbound exit to 28th Street. The municipal consent layout currently before you includes each of these elements. The City of Minneapolis has a long history of pushing for transit in the I-35W corridor. In 2005, the final report of the 35W Bus Rapid Transit Study was released, and 35W is now identified in the regional transitway system as the future Orange Line, of which the proposed Lake Street station is key. The importance of transit. I-35W is a busy corridor, not just for cars, but also for transit. It intersects with another vital transit corridor along Lake Street, and this intersection occurs in an area of the city that relies on transit. This perfectly sets the stage for this high-quality station at Lake Street. The Orange Line will provide all-day reliable service, not unlike that which light rail provides. The Orange Line will increase commute options both into and around Minneapolis and also provide for reverse commute to job opportunities in the southern suburbs. The Lake Street station will be a regionally significant station with upwards of 100 buses traveling through the station in the peak hour in the peak direction. And with that, committee members, I'm going to introduce Jim Grube to come up and talk to you in more detail about the project components.
Thank you. Good morning.
Mr. Chair and members, good morning. My name is Jim Grube. I'm the Hennepin County engineer. As such, I've been the project manager responsible for both versions of the Transit Access Project, the first one that went on hiatus and the second one that's before you today. What I seek in terms of your support today is municipal consent for a package of projects along 35W so we can proceed with an eye on a June 2017 bid opening for the packet of projects that I'm going to go through. I'm also would like to thank Jenny for the excellent work that she's done in terms of representing the city. And I'd personally like to thank Council Members Glidden and Bender for the leadership that you've provided thus far on the project. Your patience has certainly been tried by me more than once. And I really appreciate you sticking in there with us, and the other council members, their leadership also in bringing this forward to you today for your consideration. As I begin my presentation, I'd like to offer to you that this afternoon I'll be across the street at the Government Center making a similar presentation on this project, seeking endorsement of the layout from Hennepin County, and also some actions along Lake Street to bring the entire package together for both the city of Minneapolis and Hennepin County. So as we look at and we dive into what is the package of projects that's before us, again, reviewing briefly for you the Transit Access Project that Jenny has already mentioned to you. You can see the components there. We've had a number of discussions about the exits from 35W, both northbound to 28th Street and southbound to Lake Street. Looking at the 28th Street exit as a particular improvement, by having the 28th Street exit to northbound, we'll be able to keep the freeway traffic on the freeway and off of 2nd Avenue from the 31st Street, Lake Street exit that exists today. Today we have thousands of vehicles that are destined for the 28th Street area and neighborhoods north of the Greenway that use 2nd and go across the Greenway on the 2nd Avenue Bridge. By keeping that freeway traffic up on the freeway and then exiting the 28th Street, it gives a tremendous relief to the neighbors who live along 2nd Avenue. It's a particularly beneficial component of the project. Certainly, you're aware of the multimodal station and the connection that we're making between the Greenway and the station at Lake Street. Just a couple of slides for you to take a look at the concept for Lake Street. And I might add to you in terms of this presentation that there was a project advisory committee that was impaneled, and a number of members were appointed by council members, commissioners, the mayor's office, and what have you. We'll have a slide at the end that'll give you an idea of just how many people were participants on that project advisory committee. But these aspects of the project as a total were looked at very closely through the project advisory committee, who then made recommendations that were presented at a number of open houses over the last 3 years, so that the public has had an opportunity to take a look at the issues as they relate to not only the roadway aspects, but the transit station itself. What I'd offer is the project advisory committee worked long and hard on these aspects of the project advisory of the project itself to make it fit within the 4 neighborhoods that come together at Lake and 35. Whittier, Lindale, Central, and West Phillips. So we got a lot of people's attention on this project. This view that you're seeing now is a view from Lake Street itself, the previous one being from the freeway level, this one being at Lake Street itself, and the lower half of it showing the freeway level. You can see that what we're using here is a clear glass so that people can see very easily at the street level, people who are driving by or people who are approaching, with the glass so that you can see in very easily, well lit inside. Folks can see with their eyes on the street, you can see what's going on in the Lake Street Transit Station. I might add for you that the station will actually straddle Lake Street. So on the top, as you look at that, that would be reflected on both the north side of the street and the south side of the street. People who are walking along Lake do not need to cross the street to get access to this station. Availability on both sides with stairway and elevator. At the top, down at the lower end of the screen, you can see the arch, somewhat, if you will, the concept of a wave, keeping the idea of Lake Street and the wave that the city of Minneapolis looking at its lakes also. That was the theory behind using that arch and having that available. The connection between the Greenway and the Lake Street Transit Station was one that the City Council very strongly supported, and actually was one of those things at the outset of the renewed project. Much discussion was held on how we make an attractive connection between the Greenway and all the traffic that moves east-west by foot or bicycle today, and perhaps a fixed guide rail in the near future. With the Lake Street project that Jenny was mentioning and said during the peak hour up to 100 buses going through the transit station. You recognized rightly at the outset that there needed to be a good quality connection for the pedestrians and bicyclists today, and then those who would be on a fixed rail system in the future as we look 50 to 75 years out. As we looked at it, we provided separated pathways for the pedestrians and the bicyclists. Generally, if you will, a bituminous pavement that gives a very clear message to the bicyclists, and a concrete surface for a very clear message for the pedestrians. As we reach the plaza area up toward Lake Street, everything starts to come together and get a little tighter because we're bringing everyone into where the action is at the Lake Street area. Just looking at the access itself, the freeway activities, you can see on the slide that it shows the southbound exit to Lake Street. That was deemed as a very important aspect of the project by the business people, agencies, and others who were in the area when there was consideration that back in the 60s only a half of the interchange was constructed at the time. One thing we might point out to you as you look at the northbound 28th Street exit, the scale is very large here. You can see where it's at. But the design itself still sets aside the opportunity for a northbound entrance to 35W from Lake Street if and when the time is believed that is right for the introduction of that entrance. Today, it is not part of the proposed municipal consent and part of the project. As we discuss the impacts of a northbound entrance onto 35W, looking at the impact it would have on 2nd Avenue north of the McDonald's and the loss of single-family homes, we said from the benefit cost, if you will, taking the homes was a bit too high. And so that was left out in terms of the actual construction, but the design is set up so that in the future if there's a desire to do that, it can be incorporated. One thing I might add, as I talked about the impact.
Question from Councilmember Gordon?
I'm just curious if you could indicate where that is on the diagram there.
Yes, your question is where?
So you're talking about the exit to Lake Street, I think?
Yes.
And the homes that would potentially be removed?
Here is 2nd Avenue north of Lake Street. Can you see the cursor on that?
Yes, I can. That's
okay, very
excellent.
good. Thank you very much. And so the northbound entrance would slide right here, Council Member, right in that space where 2nd Avenue, between 2nd and the freeway itself. That's where, if there's a northbound entrance, it would occur there. 2nd Avenue would have to slide over to the east somewhat, and we'd end up with some loss of homes on the northerly end of 2nd Avenue. 3 or 4 of them, for sure. Thank you for that question. As we look at the freeway itself, the southbound exit does have some impacts on commercial properties. Right in the corner on the north side of Lake Street, it's the Good Grocer building now, and that structure will be taken as part of the project. I've already met with the founder of the Good Grocer. I've spoken directly to Kurt and talked to him about relocating in the neighborhood, and said we will provide that assistance as is would be expected of us. At the same time, I've also talked to the property owner of that property, and he is aware of that. And so the lines of communication have already been opened on the taking there. There's also, as you look along the westerly side of the freeway, there is a clear channel billboard that's up, and you can see that as you're traversing the highway. That clear channel billboard will have to be moved to the east. Left on the property, but moved to the east. It's going to have to come down and be put back up. Your city staff has been talking to the property owner about that. I've spoken to the property owner, and I've spoken to Clear Channel about that. So the lines of communication are open with them. As we look at it, and then there's a building on which the Clear Channel billboard is placed, talking to the property owner there, relocating just to the west a bit, and property is being rented out by a personal defense type of small business. They're aware of it. The lines of communication have been opened up. Those are the 2 significant parcels on this whole series of projects totaling $345 million. Those are the ones that are really in need of assistance in terms of making sure that they're aware, a relocation on the Good Grocer's part, and just a movement on the part of the Clear Channel. All the others, we have some impacts, but we have no residential takings at all on the project. Jenny talked about the 152 bridges. The origin of the 152 bridge concept was the August 1st, 2007 collapse of the 35W bridge over the Mississippi River. After the bridge collapsed, the legislature and governor brought a bill forth and made it into law. That would be Chapter 152 of the laws, which required that all agencies examine all of their bridges to see if we had any bridges that if one major component of the structure would fail, the entire bridge would collapse. Your city has already completed that review of your city bridges. Hennepin County has done likewise. MnDOT has as well. In the legislation, MnDOT was directed to replace or rehabilitate all of those bridges that would be falling in that category. And there are 2 bridges that fall into that category that you can see. The southbound Braid Bridge on the freeway one, where you can see the cursor, southbound 35W drops the traffic from southbound onto the inside of the freeway as you continue southbound. That's one of the 2. Then the proposal is to replace that entirely. The other is the flyover bridge from northbound 35W to westbound 94. You can see it on the slide. That is the second bridge that MnDOT has identified in the segment, and it needs to be replaced. Both of them need to be replaced by 2018, and the state's fiscal year begins July 1st of 2017. That's why we're looking at a June 2017 bid letting. One of the benefits of partnering with MnDOT on the Chapter 152 bridges is that we are able to replace the 24th Street Pedestrian Bridge over the freeway. Actually, the freeway itself will be lowered by feet, approximately 4 feet or more, and that will allow us to have a flatter bridge for 24th Street. On the top, you can see the existing structure encaged in a wire mesh. And down below, you can see a completely different type of structure for the pedestrian bicycle bridge over 35W at 24th. A flatter structure, a wider structure, much greater visibility as you're approaching from either side. This is one of the benefits from having the freeway itself lowered by feet. We're able to lower the bridge.
Oh, Councilmember Clayton.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I just had a question on the slide on the 24th Street Pedestrian Bridge, and I think I have, that's not an element that I've spent as much time understanding. So is it necessary to do those switchbacks for that bridge, or are there options not to do the switchbacks, or what's been the conversation with the community on that bridge?
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Glidden, there are options shown. A switchback is offered because of the grade from the pavement level up to the bridge crossing level, providing the adequate grade for someone who might be in a wheelchair or might have difficulty walking himself or herself. We have to have a maximum grade allowable for an incline to make it passable for someone who might need that type and not be able to use stairway. There is a stairway, if you see the cursor, so those who are able and fit can use the stairway if they wish as an alternate to the ramp itself. So you've got options.
So I guess I just didn't quite hear the answer to my question, though, and thank you, though, for explaining why the switchbacks would be needed. So my question, though, was, is there an option to not doing the switchbacks? Is the bridge able to be designed to meet those ADA requirements without doing the switchbacks? Just because I got to say, switchbacks often are not very popular. It's a lot of space that's used just for getting up and over and not especially attractive to the structure.
Thank you for that clarification. The answer is no. We must have it. And the reason is because the structure itself has depth from where you're walking to the underside of the beams that support the structure. We need a clearance from the freeway pavement to the bottom of that structure so it doesn't get hit by trucks. If we were to lower it that 6 to 8 feet, it would be much too low for the clearance of vehicles below it, and we'd have a crash problem on the freeway. That differential sets where it's at, then we have to build the ramps in to make it work.
Okay.
This particular bridge, we had much conversation at the Project Advisory Committee about. It certainly got the endorsement of the PAC. It's been seen in the neighborhoods at neighborhood meetings that Jenny and I have attended and in open houses for the public at large, not just those who use that bridge in the 24th Avenue area, 24th Street area, excuse me. The third project of the three is referred to as the Rehabilitation Project, and I generally say look south from 32nd. As we looked at the transit access project that slid in from 32nd to approximately 26th Street, Then we looked at the 152 bridge project that slid in from approximately 26th Street into the 94 Commons. We discussed about the improvement, the replacement, new pavement of the freeway from 32nd all the way into the 94 Commons area. After looking at that long and hard, then you look to the south and you realize there are 10 blocks of old pavement from the 1960s that MnDOT has been carrying along for all those years. And you consider it's now time to refurbish those or rehabilitate that pavement, essentially replace it, if you will. And very important aspect of it is the second bullet on your slide, the HOV lane that makes the southbound connection 435W between the new Lake Street Transit Access Project and the 46th Street station and point south heading toward the Crosstown Commons. Adding the Rehabilitation Project, which brings in that managed lane and the replacement of all the pavement, brings, if you will, 35W in a rehabilitated or reconstructed form from the Crosstown Commons all the way into 94. And at the same time, the last two bullets are important for the city of Minneapolis. The 40th Street Pedestrian Bridge finally gets an opportunity for some take a look at, and its replacement as part of the project. That's a partnership component between your city, City of Minneapolis, and the Minnesota Department of Transportation to finish that area off and have an open, more airy type of environment for pedestrians and bicyclists who are crossing 35W at 4th Street. Then the last one is the 38th Street Bridge rehabilitation. That one is where the intent today is to redeck the structure, provide a wider pedestrian bicycle area for people today, and make it a much more inviting crossing than it is today at 38th Street.
Councilmember Glidden.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I realized something else that, and I'll have some comments on some of these other things, but is there, did you talk, I didn't notice that you spoke during the presentation about any of the sound wall analysis, because is that part of our municipal consent? Just refresh me on that. I know it ends up being a related part of the project that we have to go back and reassess all the sound wall places and offer to residents, and if you could update us on how many changes or what changes there were to where the sound walls are today or aren't today, and what the project will look like in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Councilmember Glidden. I had not mentioned the noise walls. Thank you for reminding me about that. If I could take a moment to describe for you the noise wall aspect. When you look at doing freeway improvements, we'll say, freeway work, if you will, when you do so, then it opens up and invites a conversation about noise. And actually, it's an environmental issue that's air quality, noise, and other aspects of the project. But specifically talking about noise, the noise walls that are out along the corridor today are really rather aged. They're in tough shape, and they will be replaced in their approximate locations, into the nearest 2 or 3 feet as work is involved. And the looks of those would be similar to the ones that you've seen at the Crosstown Commons with the plank and beam. And as you look at it, they'll have a little cupola on the top. That's the style that will come up. All those that are existing will be replaced by that within a very close approximate, within a couple feet of each other. Then there were 7 different neighborhood locations along the freeway that when we did the noise analyses, it was found that noise walls were reasonable and feasible for installation. It was that people got a reasonable noise reduction and feasible in terms of the cost for the installation related to the number of people benefited. So reasonable and feasible. Once that occurred, then there was the voting process that took place for which the city council as a whole was actually unaware. The council members who represent the area were very much aware of the conversation. But Jenny and I went out to 7 neighborhoods and discussed with them the fact that noise walls in their neighborhoods were found to be reasonable and feasible, and that the state noise policy gave those who would be benefited by the wall the opportunity to vote for the wall. So we held a number of neighborhood meetings in each of the 7 locations, and each of those neighborhoods who had folks benefiting were allowed to vote on the noise wall installation or take a pass on it. 6 out of the 7 neighborhoods voted to have no noise wall. They took a pass on it. There's only one neighborhood, West Phillips neighborhood, that voted for a noise wall. That's along 2nd Avenue, north of Lake Street, past the McDonald's, and those homes we were talking about regarding the entrance to northbound 35W. If you look at those homes, they're right where the action is in terms of the construction. They're even a bit closer than the Healy Block homes are because of the location and the orientation of the freeway. That's the only location where the neighborhood supported the noise walls, both the residents and the neighborhood association itself.
So, and I think there's a lot to compliment you, Mr. Grube and Ms. Hager, and all of the staff that have worked on this project regarding how you've steered it forward. But I have to say on the noise wall, sometimes for other projects, disputes on regarding noise walls and how that process works can be some of the most controversial parts of other freeway-related projects, and the fact that that has not happened here, I think, is in part due to your efforts around communication as well as developing this process and trying to make sure that it worked right. So I just wanted to say thank you for that. I had a couple questions that I just wanted to take the opportunity to put out there now, because I think you're about to round off with a little thank you. And it's on what I believe are some unresolved aspects of this project, and I just wanted to hear from you, Mr. Grube, on what you thought were next steps, and I'm sure some of my colleagues might have other questions too. So the two of the things that I believe are unresolved aspects are, one, regarding the transit station. There was a lot of discussion about how to create opportunity in that transit station for there to be programming or vendors or other things that could be situated in that space. But as I understand it, we do not understand yet between all the jurisdictional partners how that might happen or how we might determine an organizational structure for managing that space. So that's one question I have for you on what you think are next steps. The other issue relates to something that the City Council passed a resolution on last cycle, which was supporting the PAC's recommendations regarding public art. And I know the major funding partners have not yet identified a way that public art can be funded for this project. And this was and remains, I think, a big issue for the city, for the residents around the station, knowing that other major transit facilities throughout the region regularly incorporate some element of public art to connect it to place and space and all of that. So what are your thoughts on next steps regarding public art for this space?
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Glidden, how about if I take the first one, and that is the programming of the space within the transit station and in the plaza area itself. Very briefly, what is plaza? What does that mean? As the connection comes up, that quality connection comes up from the Greenway, comes to Lake Street. As it gets into the Lake Street area, it opens up from a linear pathway for pedestrians and bicyclists into a plaza area that's wide open and much more movement of people, as you might imagine, where people are embarking, disembarking from transit and things like that. Open area location, a plaza. And so from the standpoint of vendors and how that could work, within the glass enclosure that I had shown earlier, we have talked about the possibility of vendors within that enclosure in terms of a contract basis with Metro Transit. Metro Transit will control all the actions inside the enclosure as a transit station, but on the floor space itself, there's conversation about having some vendors, I'm going to use the word transient in the context of a fixed booth that's there permanently all the time. Transient in the sense that you can contract for different vendors to have a small, like a kiosk, if you will, or a trailer or something like that on wheels so that you could have a service inside, and it could change over time by way of contract. Outside on the plaza area, the conversation on the plaza area was to have locations where you could have, again, I'm going to use the word transient only in the sense that it's not permanent, transient opportunity for various vendors who have kiosks or some mobile setup to help in the area. You know, you see outside City Hall in the Government Center here a number of food trucks for the noontime. People talk about that as an option. Other kiosks on other types of wagons or some way of bringing it in. So we were talking about keeping the vendors moving as opposed to having it stale with one type of vendor doing one type of service. Moving into the art issue, the art aspect of it is one that's kind of an interesting aspect of terms. The concept of aesthetic treatment is aesthetic treatment art. And there's an interesting aspect of it. I think art is a part of aesthetic treatment, but they're not necessarily a word that is completely interchangeable. Each of us has identified a bit of a set-aside for aesthetic treatments, and we're saying, what can we do in terms of artwork that fits within that general category or definition of aesthetic treatments? On the budget, MnDOT has some money set aside for that. What does that mean? Hennepin County has some money set aside for that. How can we make that work? And Minneapolis has some money set aside for it. What does that mean? What we're trying to do is get a glimpse of the way in which you provide for a finished product that's appealing to the eye. And in this area today at City Hall, we'd call that public art. And so we're asking, can we put a mural up on the wall, for instance? A mural. That's something that we would maybe today call public art, and others might call it aesthetic treatments, whatever you want to use for a term. We're trying to work through those aspects of what is eligible and how can we make that work. So,
Mr. Grube, I just want to interrupt you there, because usually we think of public art as something separate from aesthetic treatment, because aesthetic treatment is not artist-designed design elements that are incorporated into the structure. Rather, it is funding that can be used for, let's say, a different color of concrete or maybe an etched design, something that does make the facility definitely more pleasing to the eye and aligned with other structures in the area or matching stylistic things that are in the area, that is usually considered different than public art, which would have an artist actually hired as part of the project to help design one of those elements. And I just got confused actually on your comments on whether an artist has been hired or could be hired to help design some elements that you referred to as funding that's in the project from MnDOT and the Met Council and so forth. So I want to make sure I'm
Sure.
clear on what are the opportunities here.
Thank you for the clarification question. A public artist was hired for assisting us in putting together a visual quality manual that gave options for treatments of the surfaces. And the project advisory committee spent time with the artists talking about how many of those surfaces could be treated, and we came up with a wave concept, we came up with a time and a historic concept. So there are concepts that are already embedded in a visual quality manual to be followed up on. So an artist help us set the stage on the visual quality. The final treatment of those surfaces, what they look like. If you look at your, for instance, your brochure, everything looks white on there. There's no color in terms of surfaces with any murals or anything like that. That is still to be determined, council member. That's one of the big things we have to do. An artist has helped us get along the way. And as we look at the final one, as we look at finally putting the pieces together, do we work with that, or do we have a specific art from specific artists on some of those surfaces? That's a to be determined in the future that must be done.
Okay, I thought I understood, though, that the design is to such a point that you cannot today hire an artist to help with anything that might be incorporated into the structure, that public art at this point would be about standalone elements that aren't connected to the structure, or about treatments that could be applied to the structure, like you mentioned, a mural and things like that, that are kind of, we would consider that probably more temporary. But
Oh, well, thank you for that clarification also. I certainly
And I just might be misunderstanding. I just want to say, because the
Sure.
PAC was so clear about its recommendations, I want to make sure that we're on the same page and understanding what the PAC was hoping would happen in terms of incorporating public art into the project.
Thank you very much for the clarification. As you can see, just our conversation about public art and how it fits and how it works, there is a struggle in terms of making sure that the minds come together at the right time. In response to your question about, is it too late? Is everything, if you will, cast in stone? I would say it is not too late. It is not too late. Let's say there are a number of surfaces out there for which there's a conversation about providing relief as part of the construction of that surface. Then there are other surfaces out there that can remain, if you will, flat for the incorporation of art, either by way of a mural on, you'd pay for an artist to actually come out and put the mural on the surface, or you could actually affix things to the surface depending upon the decision that you made. And so what I'd offer is you could have art embedded in the actual, in the form liner, in the form work. You could have art as a standalone, just a surface texturing and painting of the surface so that there's a view. And then you could actually affix things that are three-dimensional to a surface. So you've kind of got three different options. The door is not closed at this point. The door is not closed at this point. But what we have to figure out is, what is the conversation about a mural on the surface? I'm going to use mural on the surface, not necessarily, but a mural on the surface, then a three-dimensional addition to the surface, or a formed line that's part of the mold when the construction occurs. So that conversation needs to come to a conclusion with the project advisory committee, with the neighborhoods, and with the city itself. What does it look like? We're darn close, but we're not there yet. There are many different surfaces out there. So as we look at it, you can see there are a number of points where the freeway project touches the neighborhoods. I'd offer to you We do have a number of those neighborhood issues that we still need to reconcile. One that I'd offer to you that we've not talked about, we've not spoken about, is the tot lot that's at 28th Street on the south side of 28th, on the west side of the freeway. We've had conversations with the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board saying that the construction will affect the tot lot, but the area will still be available after it's done. So we've said we'll take all of the